The BBC is a major part of our soft power globally, and we will soon discover how our global power has been reduced. And the other thing that has been absolutely central to enshrined in the principle of the founding principles of the BBC was that it had a public service remit. And if the BBC goes, there will be no public service broadcaster. It is widely respected throughout the world. Do we just want to end up with Fox News in this country? I certainly don't.
No, but see, I don't disagree with that. In fact, I think there is a role for a public broadcaster which works to a different standard to commercial broadcasters. I think that's a good thing. But I'm not sure that the BBC has lived up to that standard over the past few years. And I think, I think more to the point, it doesn't really matter what I think, but lots of people would question whether the BBC has lived up to that standard, where you're slightly separate from the rest of the broadcasting field. And it does feel to a lot of people like the BBC has taken sides on particular issues, has gone down.
Absolutely dispute that.
They would completely dispute that. I know that, but I think, and it's not even about the question of bias. Bias is a bit too much of a naff word. It's not. It's more that the BBC seems to a lot of people to embody that kind of woke, politically correct, liberal elite culture. And there are, as we know, from events over the past 4 years in particular, there are millions and millions of people out there who don't share those views. So the BBC does seem to grate against public opinion rather than embodying it.
No, I don't. I think you're wrong, is a short word. But I also think it's very worrying that the government are avoiding all scrutiny. They don't put BBC, they don't put politicians up for interviews anywhere now. Not the Today programme, not Newsnight. Boris Johnson wouldn't do an interview with Andrew Neil in the run-up to the election. I think that's disgraceful. We pay, they are public servants, and they should be subject to public scrutiny.
Okay. Grant Shapps was doing the rounds today, but I take the point that you're making. Let's
not on the Today programme or Newsnight, only on Andrew Marr, and that's
okay. We're going to take a break. Let me tell you a little bit about what's coming up in the morning. We're going to have a little bit more on the sad news about Caroline Flack tomorrow. Kay Burley's going to be speaking to former Hollyoaks actress Stephanie Davis on why she's calling for stricter laws on the press around safeguarding celebrities in the public eye. That's coming up tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, coming up here on our press preview, the Labour leadership candidates calling for more rights for trans women. We'll talk about that in a moment. And race. The headline is "Change Law on Women's Spaces," says Long Bailey.
So, Labour, I think, in my view, has got itself into a real muddle over the trans rights versus women's rights issue. And it really kicked off when a group called Labour for Trans Rights issued a kind of almost like an ultimatum, a list of pledges that it said all leadership candidates should sign up to. And they include things like having to accept that trans women are women, agreeing to kick out anyone from the party who is judged to be transphobic. And as we know, transphobic can cover all sorts of territory these days, not only people who are genuinely obnoxious about trans people, but even feminists who think that trans women shouldn't be allowed into women's spaces. They are called transphobic too. So it was quite an intolerant list of pledges. And now Rebecca Long Bailey and Lisa Nandy are really doubling down on this. And Lisa Nandy at Hustings in London has even argued that male-born convicted rapists should be allowed to go into women's prisons. And that's one of the things that the Times is reporting on today, which I think lots of people will find deeply, deeply alarming. The idea that someone who was born male and who has committed rape should be allowed to go to a women's prison is, in my view, horrific. And I think this is where the unguarded celebration of trans rights is the most important thing in the world. This is where it could potentially lead. It could lead to the complete undermining of women's rights and women's spaces and women's institutions. So I think Labour is losing the plot on this issue, and it really demonstrates that Labour is going down a weird, woke, PC road that will turn off loads of its traditional support.
That's your view, but obviously there are going to be a huge number of people that feel very protective of this group of people who they feel given an incredibly hard time and need protection.
Yeah, I think, absolutely. And I think what's very sad in this situation, actually, though I think Keir Starmer has not said he will sign this pledge, so in my view, credit to him on that, is that these things are complicated and they are about conflicting rights. And when you engage in debate in relation to the whole trans issue, you do have to realise that giving rights to one group may remove rights for another group. And women have fought very have some of the rights they have. And women who have been subject to physical abuse, for example, and are likely to feel very threatened by a male-bodied person, however they identify, I think it's very insensitive to them to say that anybody who declares that they are a woman, even if they still have male genitalia, should be allowed to cohabit the same space. So, and I think there's been a lack of sensitivity from both Rebecca Long-Bailey and Lisa Nandy in relation to that. And I'm a fan of Lisa Nandy, but I have to say I've been disappointed by her stance on this.
I'm just going to rush you because this is a very sensitive debate. As you know, a lot of people will disagree with both of you, but we can't reflect those opinions now because we simply don't have the time. But I'm sure there will be plenty of discussion of this in days and weeks ahead. Let's very briefly touch on Rishi Sunak, the new Chancellor,
Yes.
who is due to deliver a budget just in a matter of weeks' time.
Yes.
Some suggestion that it might have to be delayed because obviously he's only just taken over the job.
Well, he's the new Wunderkind who has been parachuted into the job, married to the daughter of a billionaire, has a property portfolio of about £10 million. So should there be a mansion tax, he will personally be affected by that. I think he's got some tough decisions to make, assuming he's allowed to make any decisions, and he may well not be, because the whole reason that Sajid Javid left was because he was ordered to fire his advisors in the view that simply number 10 advisors and presumably Boris Johnson and presumably Dominic Cummings would take over the whole operation. So at the moment it looks as though we have a puppet chancellor, and the question was whether the Tories were going to stick to the manifesto promises they made, which were about not overspending in certain ways, and clearly Boris Johnson wants to spend more.
And we've only got about 5 seconds.
I think this is
Brendan.
really, really interesting, and it's all about public spending, and I think Rishi Sunak is willing to spend more publicly than Sajid Javid was. So this actually points to the development of red Toryism.
Out of
So it's
time.
very
Thank you
interesting.
both.